Hello. Well, what if the most loyal TV viewers, the ones who grew up with the BBC, were to turn their backs on it in droves? Well, that's what's happening. More than 250,000 loyal viewers have decided they've done paying for something that they've supported for decades. The BBC TV licence is facing an unprecedented rebellion, with 300,000 people opting out last year alone. And with this rise in cancellations, the TV licensing enforcement is becoming more aggressive, more intimidating, and some could argue more successful. Welcome to Grey Matters. Hello and welcome to Grey Matters, the channel that promotes the fact that the older generation still matters and has relevance, and which looks at issues that matter to the older generation. Now then, before we get into the meat of this edition, I need to add an addendum to our last programme about household insurance. Now, in that episode, I made the point that if you tell your insurance company that you have an intruder alarm, it puts them firmly in the driving seat as to how and when you use it. And if their requirements don't fit in with around your lifestyle and your family, well, not only is that going to be very limiting on that lifestyle, it would also be very intrusive. Now, I'm a firm believer that your security should live with you, not you having to live your life around your security. And of course, you risk an awful lot of insurance-related pain if you don't use your alarm as they've dictated, and you then get burgled. Yeah, doesn't bear thinking about, does it? But you see, my argument was that you simply don't tell them that you have an alarm, and then they have no control over how you use it and no control over you. And if that prevents a burglary, well, all well and good. However, several viewers commented quite rightly that by answering no to the question, do you have an intruder alarm? Well, you're actually telling them a lie. And that alone could be enough for them to avoid your insurance. Remember, I said that many claims get denied because of what people declare or omit from their initial applications. So even though it's a kind of positive lie in that you do have extra protection at home, those viewers are correct. So I guess all I can say to that is don't listen to me, use your own judgment as to how to progress your application. Okay, TV licensing. Claims are circulating online that 900,000 people cancelled their TV licences in a year. That was fact-checked and found to be false. And the BBC's latest annual report confirms that the total number of active TV licences dropped by roughly 300,000 over the year. Now, that figure includes people who have actively cancelled their licences, the licences that ended due to non-payment, licences that expired and were not renewed, licences that were cancelled because someone moved to a property where they were already covered. Crucially, the BBC doesn't publish a breakdown of how many voluntary cancellations there were. I wonder why. Of course, the BBC hates losing their revenue. A phenomenal £50 million they lost last year, and they're not getting it. So it's not surprising that they're sending their TV licence goons after you. And judging from the spike of licence goon videos online, it certainly feels like they've ramped up the enforcement. And it's our generation that's suffering the most. Once loyal to the BBC, we can all see the problems. The huge waste of our money on inflated and undeserved salaries, money misspent on political ideologies, such as giving Said IQ Khan £1.5 million of our hard-earned cash for a Black Lives Matter drone show on New Year's Eve about 5 years ago, after it was proven that the BLM movement was a political scam. And if you need more evidence that TV licensing enforcement appears to target older people, then just look at the government's horrible piece of legislation called the Single Justice Procedure. It's a fast-track system used for TV licence investigations, and cases rather, and investigations have found that it disproportionately affects vulnerable people. So how and why does that happen? Well, for a start, cases are handled on paper, not in a courtroom, by a single magistrate sitting alone, which isn't the norm. I mean, it takes 3 magistrates really to ensure a balanced view and a consensus of guilt or innocence, but not for the SJP. Now, defendants are notified by post as to what's happening, but if they don't get the letter or they don't respond for other reasons, then the case will proceed in their absence, and more often than not, it will result in a conviction. But the whole process appears to be skewed against the defendants from the outset. There's no prosecutor or defence present in person. Everything is decided from written statements, and the magistrates rely entirely on the paperwork, which may be incomplete or confusing or misunderstood by the defendant. Yet the system assumes that the paperwork is understood, even when literacy, disability or language barriers make that unlikely. Most defendants never get legal advice because the process isn't designed for it. How wrong is that? And in many cases, it seems that the defendants were not even aware that the case was going down the SJP route. And they've been, hanging around waiting with all their evidence to hand, expecting a proper court date. And if you're unaware that your case is going to be heard in this way, then you have no opportunity to submit your own statement. So, based solely on the accusations of BBC TV licensing, I would suggest that a conviction is probably pretty much assured every time. Now, there was a report in 2024 that described the system as fundamentally unfair. It highlighted that vulnerable people were being failed, with many prosecuted without proper understanding or support. And campaign groups have documented cases where lone parents, and would you believe often young mothers, were prosecuted despite clear financial hardship. And one example involved a single parent who was criminally prosecuted during the pandemic, despite struggling with bills. But do TV licensing care? No, of course not. There's no incentive to care. We all know that their enforcement officers are on commission to sell licenses, and compassion is not a desirable trait. And they have no powers without a warrant to back them up. And they have to have very solid evidence to obtain one. No, they're just doorstep salesmen with a potential list of buyers. The problem with us oldies, however, is that many have cancelled their licences without really understanding the consequences of what they can watch and what they can't. Many still believe they need a licence to listen to the radio, and that's not been needed since 1977. Though I saw a headline today suggesting that the BBC wants to reinstate the need for that licence. They are desperate, aren't they? Now, the licensing harassment letters have left older people feeling pressured and intimidated. Do you remember that report from TV Licensing Resistance about oldies receiving letters warning them that enforcement officers might visit on Christmas Day? Do you remember that? That caused so much distress among pensioners and vulnerable groups. The BBC later clarified that such visits wouldn't occur, but the letters were real and it did cause concern. Now, TV licensing and the BBC consistently state that they do not target specific demographics and that enforcement is based solely on addresses without a licence, not on personal characteristics. However, even without deliberate targeting, several factors push older people and young mums down the enforcement route more often. Lower incomes, so they're more likely to fall behind on payments. A higher likelihood of being at home during the day, so they're more likely to answer the door to enforcement officers. What else? Oh yes, less confidence in dealing with official looking letters. They're more likely to engage then or comply out of fear, and that's the same when the licence goon arrives on the doorstep. Single parents and pensioners often face financial instability, making them more vulnerable to non-payment prosecutions. And talking of prosecutions, the latest prosecution figures show 47,500 people were prosecuted in the year to June 2022. with 44,000 convictions. So what about 22 and 23? Well, no official totals have been published for those years, despite Parliament asking for them. Now, I would genuinely like to assure our viewers that you have nothing to fear from an enforcement visit, but I can't. Even if you're playing a straight game and only use your TV and other devices in accordance with the rules, my advice is do not ever trust a TV licence enforcement goon. The moment you engage with them, they are looking for ways to trip you up, and they always want to just come in and have a quick look. I recall a video, I haven't found it for a long time, I wanted to try and put a clip into this, but a householder allowed the goon into his living room to check that the TV wasn't able to receive live programmes. The homeowner only used it for playing DVDs, and the aerial lead was not even connected, it was coiled up in the corner. But the goon plugged the aerial into the set and then tried to claim that as the TV was now connected, he needed a licence. And many of them, once in the home, will claim that because your TV or Xbox has the ability to watch live TV, that you need a licence. But for those of you who watch The Black Belt Barrister, you will have heard him say on many occasions that that's not the case. It depends on your intended use of the devices. Just because it can receive live broadcasts doesn't mean you use them for that purpose. And if that was the benchmark, then every smartphone would come with a TV licence requirement, wouldn't it? Now, there are hundreds of TV licensing videos on YouTube, and many of them are quite funny. But in most of them, the first thing the householders do is grab their phones and start filming. But not just for their own protection, but they start baiting them, arguing with them, misquoting the law to them, and some will even follow them down the street, still berating them and trying to get a reaction they can put up on YouTube. No, just don't do it. Don't engage, just say no thank you and shut your front door. The only evidence they can get is the evidence you give them. And as I understand it, they're not allowed to look through your windows either, because they work ultimately for the government-funded BBC. And that should give you protection by under the Human Rights Act to your private life. And any supposed evidence gained that way should be inadmissible. I'm not endorsing you to break the law, by the way, but if you engage with those people, they are very clever at conversationally extracting confessions, even when you don't think you've done anything wrong. Now, I'm sure most of you watching do know the rules. I imagine you channel hop a lot looking at this type of content, but just in case you don't know what you can and can't do without a TV licence, let me just remind you. You can't watch or record live TV on any device. Some people are confused by that and argue that live TV only means live events like football matches and the Olympics. But it means any programme you watch as it's being broadcast, whether that's a live event or pre-recorded. I guess the best way to think about it is that anything shown in the TV listings, in the TV Times, Radio Times, newspapers, other magazines, or on the TV Remote's programme guide, they are live broadcasts. You also can't use iPlayer for any reason, with the exception of S4C. So what can you do? Well, currently you can watch all your favourite non-BBC shows on their own channels' cash-up services, such as More 4, ITVX, Channel 5 and so on. But be aware, these services also contain Watch Live tabs, so keep clear of them. You're also okay with dedicated streaming services like Netflix, Prime, Apple TV and hundreds of others. But again, be careful, some streaming channels also show live events for which you would need a licence. And some, and I think Rakuten might be one, publish schedules and then, for example, show films to that schedule. And you can't watch them on demand, only as they're being aired. So I think you're probably going to need a licence for them too. YouTube is okay. You can watch individual channels' live streams because they're not TV channels and therefore they're not bound by any of the broadcasting rules. However, the BBC has apparently struck a deal to produce programming for YouTube, and it's unclear at the moment whether or not a licence will be needed to watch that content. And I think I know what the answer is to that. But more worrying, however, is breaking news this week that the BBC is apparently seeking to bring all streaming services under the TV licensing umbrella. and that would need a change to the law, and without doubt that would spark a huge TV licence rebellion. That is just an appalling thought, especially when you're already paying a subscription. Now, if you want to keep up to date with this subject, then do subscribe to Chili John Carney. I mean, he lives about 12 miles from me, I think, and of course to the Black Belt Barrister. They've been doing this a long time. Chili John has been doing this for years and years and years, and the Black Belt Barrister, of course, puts a legal slant onto all these issues. So I'll leave links to their channels in this description. So, have you got rid of your TV licence? Have you declared no licence needed? Have you had letters or visits from the TV licensing? Or have you or someone you know been prosecuted for no licence? Do share your experiences with us in the comments. And I hope this has been interesting for you. I hope it's been useful. And do share the video, please, especially with your older friends and relatives. And of course, you can hype this video, which you can do on mobile devices for the first 7 days. And obviously, we'd love you to subscribe and like as well. So that's it for now. Thank you for joining us. Let's fill those comments up, because I'd love to know what you think about all this. Probably as cross as I am about it. Thank you for joining us then, and until the next time here on Grey Matters, it's bye for now.